Hello there! It's been a long time, but we're back.
Ellie and I have been keeping busy with all sorts of things since Game of Thrones ended, including writing the book you see here between us, The Rise of the Dragon, a heavily illustrated, shorter version of Fire and Blood that comes out in October on the 25th. But House of the Dragon has gotten us to break out the camera again. The episode begins in the past at the Great Council of 101 AC, where the Lords of the Realm choose Prince Viserys over his elder cousin Princess Rhaenys. The episode then jumps ahead to the 9th year of Viserys' reign, as his queen is expecting while the king is arranging a celebratory tournament. Tragedy follows and Queen Aemma dies, the result of a fatal procedure to attempt to save the child she carried. The boy outlives her only by a few hours, and what follows is a conflict between the king and his feckless brother Prince Daemon that leaves Rhaenyra named as Viserys' heir.
So let's discuss changes on the show. We're not going to cover everything. We hope to post on the website a more detailed list of every little change that, you know us, we love pointing them all out.
And like we said in the Not a Review, we're doing this in part because we're not reviewing the material, we're not really getting into the nitty-gritty of analysing and critiquing, but we do want to look at it as an adaptation, and that means looking at what alterations they have done to bring it to the screen.
One of the big changes, kind of, is the prophecy. The prophecy that Viserys shares with his daughter, but he explains has been handed down from one king to his heir, and on and on. It's been a big topic of discussion in the fan community, whether this is new information or it's just a TV show thing, and the answer is kind of a bit of both.
Yeah. It's true, because it's clear from interviews that George has a notion that Aegon the Conqueror was motivated in part by dreams or by prophecy, which really shouldn't be a huge surprise to readers, I think, because, well, we know that Rhaegar later on was motivated by finding some material about a prophecy. So, and in discussing this now, the thought actually struck me as well that if Aegon had a dream about having to conquer Westeros and that the dragon has 3 heads, perhaps that explains why he decides to take both of his sisters to wives. This was not unheard of in old Valyria, but the way it's put, it makes it sound like the Targaryens on Dragonstone have not necessarily been practicing this. And it also seems like Visenya wasn't really a love match for him, so why did he make the choice? Well, perhaps because he knew that the dragon has 3 heads, and that seemed to symbolize that for him.
At the same time, it also seems quite clear from interviews, especially I think the results of a junket around table that I think Insider.com and some other websites, Gizmodo I think attended, where Ryan Condal said, George dropped this information kind of casually, Aegon had these dreams. And then he talked about how we decided to make this thing where the kings held this secret close and they passed it on. They made this legacy because it added a lot of pathos to Viserys. And it does add pathos to his belief that he's not strong enough, but he has to make sure that he leaves the realm strong, but he has to have the right heir to fight this problem. So the fact is we don't think George's idea is quite as a blunt instrument of Aegon has the dream of a Song of Fire about the White Walkers beyond the wall. I don't think that's something that is actually going to happen that way. I think what we're going to see is that Aegon and his sisters had, Aegon had this dream, he had this belief that there was something he had to do to conquer Westeros. He was the Prince of Promise. They were the 3 heads of a dragon in his dream. And then they do it and okay, is that it? Have we done it? Is there more? Does he keep having dreams? Does he keep feeling it's not done yet? And it gets lost. I think it gets lost.
There's enough turmoil, there's enough uncertainty, I think, as you said, probably, as you say, from Aegon, that he doesn't know, have we fulfilled it? Have we, done what was needed to avert this threat? Because maybe there is something that he knows that there's some, it is important for you to conquer Westeros, to face some threat to mankind. It may not have been more specific than that. It may not have had anything, or most likely didn't have anything about White Walkers or a wind from the north. On the other hand, of course, the 5 forts in Essos could be known to the Valyrians, for example. So they could know that something has in the past come from the north of the world, and he might have put something together, but it doesn't seem like he put anything forward to his heirs.
No, certainly. I think what I point
Maybe
out,
something was written down, and maybe that's what Rhaegar finds.
I certainly think that's the case, that it gets kind of lost, it gets kind of forgotten. Maybe there's old letters, maybe Septon Barf had something. And then we have, I feel like there's a period probably from like Maegor, after Maegor, on to like Aerys the First, who was really caught up with prophecies. But he may have resurrected and found this stuff. And Aerys, by the way, Lord Bloodraven, Brendan Rivers, who goes up to, ends up becoming Lord Commander of Night's Watch, and now is the last Green Seer. They may have found it again, and that may have then wormed its way back into. Then it gets lost at Summerhall because everyone dies, and then maybe Rhaegar figures it out again, and he figures, okay. So I love that idea. I like the idea about it's something that's lost and found. Rather than this super blunt instrument that they have right now.
On the other hand, obviously, on the show, they may imagine that following the Dance of the Dragons, it is lost again.
Yeah, I suppose it's possible.
Entirely possible. So that, by the time we reach Daenerys and so on, it had, or Rhaegar rather, it had been lost again. But so a little bit of both. There's some of it is from George, but they've embroidered and elaborated on it.
This is a bit of a minor change, but the weirwood in the Godswood that gets featured quite prominently is not a thing in the books. In the Red Keep, they have the heart tree is actually an oak, and we get a sense that you can't just plant weirwoods wherever. They kind of just they had grow wherever they grow, and people then built their castles around them wherever they found them.
Yeah.
So there was no weirwood on that hill. This is a change. I mean, I think we even see the Godswoods in the books, on the TV show, I think, and I think they actually didn't have a heart tree. They kept to an oak.
I don't actually remember. It's possible. And obviously there are other Godswood that are in the south of Westeros which do not have heart trees either.
Yeah.
As in, or they have
For
heart
example,
trees, but they don't have weirwoods as heart trees.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's interesting. They obviously can explain it as well. It'll get destroyed. Baelor the Blessed will say, none of that. I don't really think that's Baelor, but anyway, something could happen to it. So that was just one of the things that kind of leapt out at me. Like, wait a second, did they have a heart tree
One of
there
those
last time?
minor nitpicks that we just have to point out. More than a nitpick, of course, is the big Velaryon controversy, and I know people have been expecting us to say something about it. So, let's just have it out. The Velaryon sigil, it should be an actual seahorse.
# fix the seahorse.
In all seriousness, there are details in the next episode or two that add more context for the Velaryon and the Targaryen history on the show, so we're actually going to hold our comments about the Velaryon changes until then.
That said, we have some thoughts on it in our, not a review, how it sort of, what choices they made, and it's understandable they made a choice. There's some alternative choices. I actually am wondering, not just alternative, like in addition to, if they're going to go for it, why not go for it? But we'll discuss that. I think next episode. Maybe it's the third episode that has it. I can't quite recall, but we'll see.
Of course, we have to talk some background details as well. I mean, that's why we're here. We're keeping the mythos, keeping the lore, and we feel that we want to elaborate on some of the things that they do a great job of touching on a lot, and they throw out these little details in the first episode, and they'll do more later on. So and they kind of expect people in the world to just know it, and they don't do an info dump, which is fantastic. That's the great way of doing it. But if you want to know more, well, we're going to give you some more.
The Doom of Valyria. Now that's one that I didn't think we had to actually explain to people.
Actually.
But I actually saw people asking, like, what the heck is a Doom? What is that? And they don't explain it. It's true. So, set the scene. Prior to the conquest, about 100 years prior to it, Valyria is destroyed. Valyria is the greatest empire the world has ever seen. The home of the dragon riders, the Valyrian dragon lords, who have conquered most of Essos. Well, at least a large part of it. Essos is very big, but a large part of it. And their empire disappears pretty much in a day, because their home, the old Valyria, was built amidst the 14 flames, 14 active volcanoes. And those were clearly part of one very, very large super volcano, and that erupted in a kind of Atlantis-type cataclysm. The only dragon riders who survived in the aftermath were Targaryens, because they had left before the Doom. Daenerys the Dreamer, the maiden daughter of Aenar Targaryen prophesied it. She dreamed it, but it would happen. And he packed up and left. Now, they were a fairly minor house of dragon lords. So others mocked them as silly, weak. I think he has shades of like Jor-El and Krypton, like warning everyone, right?
Yeah, and they're like, no, we're not going to get destroyed.
No.
I mean, they thought that they were controlling the power of the volcanoes, is the impression one gets, that they derived magic from it and that they had control over it, and perhaps something went wrong with that control.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of speculation as to what happened, but the facts that we know are that, you know, the Doom wiped out the Valyrian Empire, and the only reason we have Targaryens alive is because of prophecy.
Yeah.
When we see the flashback to the Great Council, they mention that there were in total 14 pretenders who made a claim for the Iron Throne. So 12 in addition to Viserys and Princess Rhaenys.
Right. Some of them we really don't know anything about at all. They're not really discussed. One man claimed, he was a man-at-arms who claimed to be the bastard son of Maegor, the Cruel. But Maegor had raped his mother. And he was dismissed, not because they didn't believe that Maegor had raped his mother, but they didn't believe that Maegor had sired him. Maegor famously had issues with having, you know, living children. Any of the births that came out tended to be monstrous,
scaled little mini dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another that was dismissed was a hedge knight who claimed to be Jaehaerys' own bastard son. When Jaehaerys himself learns of it, one of the changes they've done actually is he's present at the Green Council, whereas George notes that he stayed away from it because he didn't want people to be influenced. Yeah. But Jaehaerys, when he learns of it, disproves it and has the man arrested.
There were also some of the, you know, obviously descendants of Jaehaerys that were considered. He had one son who was actually alive, that was Archmaester Vagan, but he had vows to the Citadel, of course, so he was dismissed because of that. He had 3 bastard sons of his daughter Sarah, who had gone into exile into Essos years earlier.
She's an interesting one.
Yes, she had a colourful life, and Jaehaerys would not have been too happy to have a son of hers inheriting. Another claim was from a man who claimed descent from Gaemon the Glorious, but that would have made him 9 generations removed from the Targaryen main line, so even if it was true, it was not really particularly relevant.
Yeah, that was quite a reach that he was making there.
Yeah, that's kind of like counting back to, yeah, I'm a descendant of Genghis Khan, please hand over Mongolia to me or something.
Now, in the books, the decision came down to the end between Viserys and Laenor, rather than Rhaenys, as they have it on the show. Rhaenys had already been passed over once after her father Aemon was killed on Tarth, when he was there to help fight off an invasion from some Myrish rebels. Now she came more in the name of her son, Laenor. I mean, Laena was already born, now she has a son named Laenor, so Laena should inherit at least. Viserys, on the other hand, was the son of Balon the Brave, Aemon's younger brother, who became heir after Aemon died. That's who Rhaenys was passed over for. And he ended up dying several days, after several days of pain in his side that was attributed to like a burst belly, which I guess is...
Probably appendicitis or something like that. So Viserys was very unlucky in that losing his 2 eldest sons.
Yeah. Now, Viserys actually, I don't think they mentioned it. Viserys had an overwhelming victory according to the accounts. It wasn't just like a few people, like it was neck and neck. It wasn't all neck and neck. She had very powerful supporters. For example, Rhaenys had her uncle, Boromund Baratheon, who they've turned, I guess, into her cousin, because that's what she calls him at the tournament. But despite these strong supporters, I think the Starks were also supporters, if I recall right. But regardless, yeah, everyone really just wants a man on the throne.
Yeah, and I think that by the time you were at the Great Council, I mean, they simplified it a little bit by not having had her passed over earlier, because they had already said that, okay, she may be the daughter of the eldest son, but the next son in line has a son, we will go straight to him. Now the fact that then she has a son, well, that they've kind of already ruled that line out of the inheritance.
And interestingly, it wasn't the Great Council that did that. It was actually Jaehaerys himself who made the choice.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, that probably did carry a lot of weight. Like he already said once that no. Now there, it was more complicated because he was thinking, well, Balin is an adult man, bold, capable. He would be better if something were to happen to me tomorrow. Then she's very young, Rhaenys.
Could we then think that perhaps, which technically complicates it on the show, that if Laenor had been a famous warrior by the time of the Great Council, or something along those lines, would that have carried more weight?
I actually think it probably would have, to be honest. But he was just a boy, and the Laenor of the books is not really a martial person at all. So that, but yeah, if he had been some great warrior, I think it would have given him a lot more weight to it.
Yeah.
The Triarchy gets mentioned by Corlys as his problem for shipping and so on. So what is a Triarchy? It's an alliance, an eternal alliance, allegedly, between Tyrosh, Lys, and Myr, who had, in 96 AC, about 15 years prior to the start of, the main start of the episode, had defeated Volantis in the disputed lands, driven them out. And then they turned their attention to the Narrow Sea. There were pirates all over the place. They decided to clear them out from the Stepstones, which is this chain of islands that is the remnant of the land bridge that once existed between Westeros and Essos. And to begin with, the king was really, everyone was happy with it because they caused trouble.
I mean, who doesn't like to get rid of pirates?
Yeah. But the problem is that then once they did that, they thought, well, we should get paid for keeping it clean of pirates, and they started asking for almost as much as the pirates were, and in some ways just as badly, because they would start taking slaves off of ships as they're told. They seizing sailors, seizing passengers, including noble men and women, to sell off into slavery.
Yeah. This is something they're actually going to touch on in a later episode, that we see that it does affect Westeros. This is House of the Dragon, so of course we need a special little section for these videos. We need dragon facts. We thought we'd speak about things that they mention about the dragons, and also talk a little bit about the dragons that are mentioned when they are first mentioned in an episode, and so that you can learn a little bit more about their past and so on. But we'll start with the dragon pit, of course, because we've only seen it before in its ruined state, and here in House of the Dragon, of course, it is fully functional and in use. It is a huge cavernous building that sits atop the Hill of Rhaenys in King's Landing, and it's ruined by the time of Game of Thrones, but at this point the Targaryens use them. There may be some thoughts about how the keeping the dragons in the dragon pit constricts them and lessens how much they will grow, because they're not flying free and so on. So I think that they don't have all dragons there. I mean, some dragons prefer to lair on Dragonstone, for example, and I think they tend to lay their eggs more often, or keep them on Dragonstone at least.
Well, I think it's Barristan Selmy who actually puts forward the theory, and it's actually not something that was. I think he says some maesters say that it's because of this, but the dragons never grew as big as they did prior, because they were growing up in in the dragon pit.
Yeah. It makes sense.
It makes sense,
I think,
to some degree. But at the same time, it also seems to have to do
with magic.
Magic, and the waning of magic seems to also be a part of it.
It's true.
So the initial construction of the Dragon Pit begins in 42 AC, and that's at the command of Maegor the Cruel. And then Jaehaerys I actually completes it in 55 AC. So it took a long time to build. It's very massive. It's huge, gigantic dome. It's very accurate to what's described in the books. And the ruination, well, that's a subject for some later episode.
Indeed. The dragons are cared for by the Dragon Keepers. And in Fire and Blood, they are a fairly prosaic group. They are guardians and caretakers of the dragons, and they're something of a martial order, basically protecting them as well. They have black armor with dragon scales, and they carry weapons. The show, on the other hand, has turned them into something of a monastic order, or almost a cult of people who perhaps might even worship the dragons, although we don't know that yet. But they speak High Valyrian to the dragons, and some of them seem to speak only High Valyrian. So they have this connection with, and the idea that it seems to be in general on the show, that you speak High Valyrian to the dragons and give them the commands in High Valyrian.
Kind of like for German with like protection dogs.
Yes, I suppose a lot of people who train Schutzhunds and such will teach them commands in German, although I can assure you that our German ancestry boxers do understand both English and Swedish perfectly well.
Finally, this episode features two dragons and it mentions one more. So we'll start with the one that gets mentioned because that's Viserion, the Black Dread.
Who is dead.
Who is dead in 94 AC, so he's been dead almost 20 years at this point. He was the hugest of Viserion dragons. He was the only one that who survived from Valyria. He was the last living creature to have seen Valyria outside of whatever strange creatures live in Valyria.
Yeah.
He had 3 riders that we know of. Oh, I have to assume Einar probably.
He was probably Einar's dragon, actually, yeah.
But Aegon the Conqueror and his son Maegor, and then Princess Arya. Now, Arya is a very sad story. She's the Conqueror's great-granddaughter, and she claimed the dragon and flew off that very night and was gone for almost 2 years. No one knew what happened to her. Jaehaerys tried to find her. Everyone tried to search for her. When she got back, she was frail and desperately ill, and she died a very gruesome, very ugly death that's described in Fire and Blood.
Yeah, that one's pretty horrifying. So it's possible that Balerion basically flew back to the place of his birth, to Valyria, and that she was, struck by some illness or infected by something in Valyria. Whether or not one should say that she claimed Balerion. I mean, he allowed her to ride him. She probably didn't have full control over him if he ended up flying her to Valyria. Yeah. But something went very wrong there. It's a very sad story. And the last rider who claimed Balerion was, in fact, Viserys Targaryen. His mother, Alyssa, had wanted to claim Balerion, but the Dragon Keepers had persuaded her not to because he was so old and he could barely fly. But for some reason, Viserys wanted to claim him anyway.
That's really interesting. Just because his mother got dissuaded, or is it, on the show they're playing this idea of Viserys as interested in the history, maybe he wanted that connection to
Very
the
interested in Valyria,
yeah,
in particular.
So maybe he just...
Maybe the idea of having as his dragon the last living creature from Valyria was something that appealed to him, and
that works on the show.
It would work, but Balerion could barely fly. He managed to get him to fly around King's Landing, but 3 times around the city, I think. But he'd wanted to try the Dragonstone, but he was concerned that the dragon couldn't handle it. So he landed him again, and he died less than a year after Viserys claimed him.
The first dragon we actually see on the show is Syrax, and that's the dragon of Rhaenyra. And not much to be said about her. She's yellow, as you can see. She is female. There's this whole thing where we're told dragons can change gender, maybe, but then George names some...
She-dragons.
She-dragons.
Yeah.
And the other thing we know is that she's named after a Valyrian goddess. Over time, she doesn't really hunt anymore for herself. She just gets fed and kind of taken good care of.
She does have several clutches of eggs.
Yeah, she'll have several clutches of eggs during Viserys' reign. It's not clear if she's already started or if that actually is later. We don't really know the timeline of that. And then the other dragon that we see this episode is probably of a similar age to the way they're discussed, is Caraxes.
Yes, it sounds like they might be of fairly similar age. And Caraxes, he was nicknamed the Bloodworm by the Dragon Keepers because he was such a fierce young dragon in the Dragon Pit. And that was in the reign of Jaehaerys I. And Jaehaerys' oldest son, Prince Aemon, the Prince of Dragonstone, claimed him first, and he rode him during the Fourth Dornish War as well as to Tarth to fight the Mirrorish rebels, and that's where he was killed. And then about a decade later, in 105 AC, Prince Daemon, so the son of his brother Balin, claimed Caraxes again, and it certainly seems like they are a pretty good match as far as it comes to ferocity and wildness.
And that is that for this first episode, just kind of looking at background and discussing some of the changes. We had hoped to post this on Monday, but
No, we had a bit of a, well, we were, during the weekend, we had a dog show that left us dead tired on Sunday. And then Monday, I was unfortunately stuck helping a friend whose horse was ill. So we were too tired to do it in the evening. So hopefully next weekend will go much more smoothly. And we'll try and have the format roughly like this. We'll do, background details, some of the changes, and then the dragon facts, I think, is going to be the focus of what we're doing.
Whereas on the website, www.westeros.org, we will have episode guides that go into more detail in theory. Right now we're working out that aspect because the templates aren't quite working.
Let's just say we had a lot of other things on our mind before the show, and suddenly it's time. But the videos, we know that people tend to enjoy taking in the content that way, so we will see where we end up on the rest as the season progresses.
And also, obviously, when the show ends, there is Rise of a Dragon for you to enjoy. We hope. I think we're going to aim at trying to do some content about that as well, but perhaps in collaboration with Random House, our publisher. Maybe talk to some of the artists who have worked on this book.
Because we've had some really amazing artists.
Yeah, we've had some really amazing artists.
Absolutely amazing artists.
So we'll see, but hopefully we'll be seeing you next week on Monday, discussing the second episode, which is titled, I believe, "The Rogue Prince."
Indeed.